Producing over 500 hours per week of talk radio, GCN Live is a world leader in talk radio. Archives for the following program can be found at gcnlive.com.
Live from the palatial studios at Emerson College in beautiful downtown Boston, this is the Jeff Santos Show on the Revolution Radio Network. Rebuilding America. Together, investing, activism, and supporting the middle class. Now, here's Jeff.
Thank you, Shane. Good afternoon, Americans, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show. We are live in Studio A on the campus of Emerson College. It is great to be with you on this 20th of October, 2015. Got a great show for you today. Way to go, Prime Minister Trudeau. Canadians with a Liberal. Gotta love that. We'll talk with Vaughn Palmer at 4:06 today. He is a writer for the Vancouver Sun, progressive journalist up there, and get his take on what this means for not only our friends in Canada, but our friends here in the United States, and what it means for Bernie Sanders in terms of single-payer health care and a whole slew of other issues. They ran on a very similar economic have and have-nots campaign, and we'll get into that with Vaughn Palmer. Of course, Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us, talk about the Pacific Northwest. Mark was helpful in getting this situation set up. We'll talk to Mark at 3:34 about what the election means for the next-door neighbor in Seattle. Robert Craig in Wisconsin will join us at 5:34. Our Teacher Tuesday. We'll have two teachers from Badass Teachers representing the American Federation of Teachers Teacher Tuesday segment. That's not confusing enough. Michael Flanagan and Priscilla Sandstead will join us. They'll talk about an education justice conference where desks were thrown out of the conference room. We'll get into that. And, of course, we'll take your phone calls at 844-3-SANTOS, 844-372-6867. Day two of the Biden watch, whether he gets in or not. Yesterday it was MSNBC camped out at the White House waiting for something to happen. Today CNN was monitoring everything that Joe Biden said. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show. 844-3-SANTOS. Our next guest comes to us from Seattle, the Pacific Northwest. He is, of course, a great journalist. He's with us every Tuesday. Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us. Happy Tuesday, Mark. How are you?
Good. It's a sunny day in Seattle, but like I said before, don't tell people. You know, it always rains here. Think about that. Yeah.
It's great to have you on. You know, there was a big victory to the north of you last night. And, of course, we're talking about the new Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, the son of Pierre Trudeau, the great Prime Minister of in the late 60s, 70s in Canada. And a surprise, I think, to a lot of people. So what are the people in Seattle thinking about, an hour and a half to the north of their friends in British Columbia and people across Canada and their vote last night? What are you hearing?
Well, the first thing that people have been talking about is the fact that the New Democratic Party, the NDP, actually didn't win as many seats in Parliament as folks expected up here.
Yeah.
But the country has definitely moved towards the Liberal Party. And, Trudeau is son of Pierre Trudeau, who was pretty much a rock star as far as Canada was concerned, hanging out with movie stars and rock singers, and, had a huge charismatic appeal. And some have compared the popularity of Pierre Trudeau to, John F. Kennedy in the United States. But the country had moved to the right, maybe to the center-right in terms of American politics, but Stephen Harper was definitely a Bushite kind of person. I mean, he had Karl Rove helping him win his elections up there. Some tension with the United States over Harper's support of the Keystone XL pipeline and other issues. But two factors here, Jeff. one, earlier this year, Canada moved into a slight recession, so economically, Harper was becoming less popular on economic issues, but also his support of the ban on veils for Muslim women becoming citizens in Canada became a real hot button politically and caused a lot of unpopularity. So the whole idea of Canada moving to the right, it looks like that's shifted, starting yesterday, but obviously, the polls were showing that was happening. And this is the first time, actually, for many years that the Liberals have actually taken power and taken so many seats in the Parliament. Stephen Harper was a conservative and really, really setting the mood for the country in a lot of issues. Justin Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau's son, who is now Prime Minister of Canada. But I have to tell you, it's an issue that's been very, very important for the Liberals, but Canada is definitely moving towards a Liberal point of view. And another thing that I've heard people talking about up here, and this is just, opinion-wise, is, wow, isn't it interesting how the Democrats in the United States seem to be having to move a little more towards the left because of Bernie Sanders, and now looking north of the border, and you have this same sort of change in the political strategy going on there. Now, Justin Trudeau does support the XO pipeline, though. So in that, he is actually in a disagreement with the present administration in the United States. But on most issues, the Canadians are definitely moving towards the left. And I have heard a lot of complaints from my Canadian friends up there in Toronto and other places about Harper's administration and how they didn't think that it really represented the Liberal tradition in Canada. So here you go. The people have spoken, and Pierre Trudeau's son is now Prime Minister, so a little bit of a dynasty going on there as well, I guess.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of elements and a lot of links to what is happening here in the United States. Talking with my good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. My thought here is this scenario where you have, and I think this is, in my view, like a real connection. In the NDP leader, he basically ran a front-runners campaign. A lot of people, particularly early on, have said the same thing about Hillary Clinton. And I wonder if you're looking for the true outsider, and this year the outsider, not only in Canada, but in the UK with Corin, and of course here in the United States with what Bernie Sanders is doing, is this an indication that if you want the real thing, as we've talked about many times, BS, no BS with BS, then Bernie Sanders is the real thing in terms of being the outsider. If that's indeed where America wants to go, that is the case. Now, Trudeau, even though, of course, he was the son of the former prime minister, and a very popular one for many years, was really the outsider because the NDP had established themselves as the main opposition party and were going into this race as the leader in the polls. And then, because Harper has been a problem for a long time, and then all of a sudden they started running this sort of, very close to the vest campaign, and before you know it, here comes Trudeau on the outside and wins a huge victory. I think it's 181 seats, I believe, that the Liberals now have. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you're hearing that, in your circles in the Pacific Northwest, but I think that there's something there. If indeed, Americans and the Democrats, obviously to begin with in the party, want to go to a new direction.
Well, one thing that is very similar in terms of the Bernie Sanders campaign, in terms of economic inequality, they definitely have something in common there. And I just have to say that the folks that, like the Northwest Progressive Institute and places like that, and up here in Washington, Oregon, Northern California region, people have been saying, isn't it amazing that this new precedent has been set not only for American politics, but also now for Canadian politics, but just the fact that Bernie Sanders got so much attention as the underdog and is getting so much support through individual contributions, by the way, with no money from corporate tax. In fact, there's a story out that he just turned down some pharmaceutical money and was given $2,700 from a pharmaceutical representative who wanted a meeting with him. Well, he took that money and gave it to a free clinic and has refused to work with that pharmaceutical representative. But it does show that there's a new precedent that's been set, and it wasn't just the fact that Bernie Sanders was involved in the debate and so on such a high-profile level, but also the fact that certain issues came up during the U.S. presidential debate for the Democratic Party, which really has never been discussed before as far as I know. I don't ever remember, and I've watched and studied and recorded a lot of the debates in the United States. I've never heard the word socialism come up. I've never heard a discussion about the benefits or disadvantages of socialism versus capitalism during a U.S. presidential debate. And I've also never heard a presidential candidate criticize the media and its coverage of these political issues, but also claim truthfully that he's the only person who was on that stage who's not a billionaire, which is kind of shocking if you think about it, that, out of all of the candidates standing up there on that stage, Bernie Sanders actually represents a populist progressive movement. And these are new things, for the United States political dialogue. And Anderson Cooper's very, very actually critical questions and in some ways confrontational questions on these issues of progressivism versus capitalism versus socialism. These are new ideas. I have to hand it to Anderson Cooper for coming out, without pulling any punches.
Yeah, I think he makes more, too, than Bernie Sanders. We'll be right back with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Final 9 here on the Jeff Santos Show, talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield in the Seattle area. And Mark, one of the fascinating things that we'll be talking with Vaughn Palmer of Vancouver Sun, who's a friend of yours, of course. Thank you for identifying him today. And there's a lot of similarities between what happens in Vancouver and British Columbia, particularly Oregon and Washington State. And talk to us about that as a citizen of the Pacific Northwest.
Well, Vaughn Palmer has done regular reports on a Seattle radio station for a while now, and there is an interest in Canadian politics and economics in the Northwest. There are a lot of people who cross the border every day, back and forth across ID, which allows you to cross the border because there's so much economic trade, tourism going on. There's also a big connection with trade with Asia, the Pacific Rim. Is an important economic bloc, and so we have a lot in common with the folks up there in Vancouver. And yes, I've heard Vaughn many times on Seattle media talking about these kinds of issues. He's well known around here, and people are especially interested now, during this national election. But a lot of folks living in the Northwest would say that we actually have more in common with the culture and the environment and the politics in British Columbia than we probably do with the rest of the country. There's been this long-going idea about Cascadia, about the fact that British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, and Northern California have a very similar culture. They've been much more liberal than the rest of the country in the United States. A lot of people have referred to us over here as the left coast because of our politics. There's been a lot of support in this area for environmental protections, a lot of support for things like single-payer healthcare and green technology. Also, British Columbia was way ahead on the tolerance for the use of recreational marijuana long before Seattle came along and Washington State came along and legalized it. So, yeah, there's a real connection here that a lot of people in the rest of the country are probably not aware of. Seattle is not far from the Canadian border, and there's a lot of investment money actually in Seattle that comes from British Columbia and real estate developers and a lot of architecture in Seattle that is actually Canadian in nature. In fact, if you look at the skylines in Vancouver and Seattle, you'll see a similarity in the architectural designs because of this cultural similarity that we have here. So, yeah, most people probably don't realize that if you live in Seattle, you probably have more in common with your brothers and sisters living north of the border than you do with folks maybe in a lot of the other parts of the United States. So ongoing relationship economically, culturally here, And people really do pay attention to what happens in Ottawa and in Vancouver and British Columbia. Many Seattleites who really enjoy visiting Vancouver and vice versa. And, of course, there's a lot of films and television shows that are set in Vancouver that are supposedly in Seattle. But,
right.
So there's a similarity in the look of the areas as well. So, it's that Northwest thing. It's hard
well,
to
now you need a hockey team so you can have a rivalry going with Vancouver.
Yes, although it looks like in the Northwest, soccer is becoming more and more important. So that's another connection with...
That's more of a summer sport, though. Yes,
but more of a European style, I guess, is one way to look at it, with the good coffee and, just this whole liberal sort of point of view about politics. I mean, in Canada, of course, it's been traditional to talk about socialized medicine and other forms of socialized, government policy. In the United States, it's sort of a new thing with the Bernie Sanders wave, but in Canada, it's been popular for a long time. And I think a lot of people in Seattle are looking at Canada now and saying, great, the Harper days are over. And that's been a major concern of a lot of people, especially on issues like the XL pipeline. And it just seemed like the Harper administration was in the pockets of the Bush administration for quite a while there, and it was really surprising to people here to see the Canadian government move towards the right in that way. And one of the results of that was a much less tolerant policy towards environmental protection. So there are a lot of Canadians that I have been talking to over the last few years that are disappointed in the way that the Canadian government has been working with the oil companies on some of these issues, and it's good to see that the Northwest is, that the British Columbians and where the NDP did actually win quite a few seats, and then the rest of the country is moving more towards a Northwest-style sort of progressive attitude. So, yeah, it's very interesting. I think there is this sort of hands-across-the-border thing going on here, and it's been happening for a long time. And this just shows that the Canadians are moving in the same direction as a lot of people in the United States right now in terms of national politics.
Well, I mean, I look at what is happening in Canada, and of course Trudeau, and we'll talk more about this with Palmer in a few minutes. But the fact is that, in my view, you have a situation where, the folks in Canada looked at change, they looked at economic change, and the one thing that they wanted to keep, that the Canadians, and even Harper, although he wanted to play around with it, is single-payer health care, which, of course, something we need in this country more so than ever before. And I'm wondering, the fact that Trudeau is for this, if that will be a big factor as well with Bernie Sanders, because, that to me is a very big deal. And, of course, our friends at the National Nurses are on board as one of the major unions, the biggest union to endorse thus far of Bernie, and they've been promoting that. And of course, I'm going to get a lot of heck from my friends in San Francisco, who also consider to be part of the liberal Pacific left coast, if you might. So, another cafe war with their friends from the Seattle area. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. I get 60 seconds. Your thoughts on what Single-Payer does now with with another round of liberal politics in Canada. Bernie Sanders can point to it. Why are they doing it, and why aren't we doing it here?
Yes, and my comment on that would be that I've talked to a lot of folks from Canada, and one of my best friends is from Ottawa. And the socialized medicine in Canada has been very successful for a lot of people. A lot of people have been able to gain access to health care. It's free health care in Canada, folks. So there's been a lot of misinformation about problems with that system. But in general, the Canadians that I speak to seem to be very happy with it. So
right on. Hey, thanks so much. Talk to you next Tuesday.
Thanks,
all the best,
okay,
Mark
Jeff,
Taylor-Canfield. Right back after this timeout. Just think about this. Matter of fact, for those of you who are listening in the Great Lakes state of Minnesota, and of course our great producer Scott is from there, and a lot of other people that listen to the show, Jesse the Body Ventura became governor after two very established candidates, one Republican and one Democrat. Mr. Coleman, the former mayor and senator, was recently defeated by Al Franken. And, of course, Skip Humphrey, Hubert Humphrey's kid, who was, I think, the attorney general at one point in Minnesota. And they fought back and forth. And in swept the wrestler. Now, the TV host, who I've interviewed, fascinating guy. There's a lot of theories about the Kennedy assassination and a bunch of other things. But that's how he became governor, as an independent. Now, of course, we're in a Democratic primary this time. But I think Bernie Sanders gets in there, and he's the outsider. Much as what Mr. Trudeau ran as the outsider, even though, of course, his father was a great Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau. Many of you who saw the movie Argo, based on a true story in 1979, Ben Affleck, of course, stars in it. And the big part of that movie was hanging out at the Canadian Embassy in Tehran. Well, Prime Minister at the time was Pierre Trudeau. So a good guy. Helped those Americans in a very difficult time. And I think Justin Trudeau, his son, 43-year-old, married to a young, very attractive wife. They'll be making comparisons to the former French Prime Minister's wife and everything else. It's field day. Once Hollywood gets a hold of it, have E.T. and all the other TV shows on top of that. But the fact is that I think that a candidacy, and we'll get into this with Vaughn Palmer, that comes from the outside and says, enough of the inside bickering, enough of, he back and forth. People want change, and they wanted economic change in Canada, and they want it down here in the States as well. One point to think about here is, and again, you don't really follow, and I'm no expert by any means, but the NDP, National Democratic Party up there in Canada, was supposed to win this. They were the front runners all the time. They had a majority, or they were the minority in government and parliament, but they were doing very well. They played kind of a conservative, very close to the vest kind of race, didn't say anything too outlandish and so on and so forth. Well, that's exactly what Trudeau didn't do. He went out with bold initiatives and so forth. And in the end, Trudeau and the Liberal Party, that's the name of his party, it's Liberal, ended up taking a ton of votes from the NDP and winning. Now, think about Clinton and Sanders. Think about the front-runner status that Hillary Clinton has, and she's doing better running away from that front-runner status and running sort of, as her own person. But thinking about how you run a campaign and trying to be an outsider in the year of an outsider. I mean, Donald Trump is an outsider, even though we all know that billionaires are never really far from the inside, no matter if they're outside of government. And Bernie Sanders, of course, is the ultimate outsider, even though he is inside of Washington and has been over the last 20 years or so. But he is never in the club that goes along to get along. So I think it's going to be fascinating to hear from this. We want to hear from you at 844-3-SANTOS if you feel there's a connection there. We've already seen in another English-speaking country of the United Kingdom and Great Britain, where Mr. Cornyn has taken over the Labour Party reins and, is trying to lead a more progressive, populist, Labour-friendly party, and going back to the roots of Labour, not the new Labour, which Mr. Blair took, and Mr. Clinton, gave him the idea that he was a new Democrat and third way, all that other kind of nonsense, which got away from the basic populist focus concern of everyday Democrats, of everyday focus on free university or 4 years of free university for public universities, or the idea of health care for all, or just understanding that the wealth was exceedingly getting more and more for those who are the 1%, and making it easier for companies to monopolize, doing all the things that Republicans want, and Clinton pretty much gave into. He had, he was playing basically defense the entire time, and very few initiatives after the first 2 years where he had the power, couldn't anything get done. That, to me, is another reason we got to be very careful, whether it's Clinton or Biden, that we need to expand the party. And right now, and even though he's got warts and he's not perfect, Bernie Sanders is the best chance for the Democratic Party to expand its reach, to get more people who have never voted before, first-time folks, 18, 19-year-olds, to vote for the first time. That is important. As our good friend Jerry Austin has said, 17-year-olds who are 18 by Election Day next year. That's going after the young audience, and that's where this country needs to grow. 844-3-SANTOS, phone number to join us. Let's go to the phones. Let's go to the great city of Chicago and talk to Rudy. How you doing, Rude?
Okay, Jeff. Lots of breaking news.
Yes.
This is yeah, you're right. This is the era of the outsider, or the year of the outsider. And I think maybe Joe Biden might come out and say he still wants to be the vice president of Bernie Sanders.
I don't know about that. But I tell you, his entering the race may help Bernie Sanders become president. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, he might want to be a professional vice president for another 8 years. And
Secretary of State, maybe.
Oh, yeah, right. There you go. And
foreign policy, right on there.
Right, and it looks like I did a couple of weeks ago, I talked to you about what I read in one of these, I think it was in these Times magazine, about how the Liberals are going to win in Canada, and they have. So
yeah.
That's good.
No, you were right on. Great prediction, my friend.
And also, it's got to be the year of the outsider and the progressives, because that's Jeremy
Corbyn. Corbyn.
Yeah, Jerry Corbyn. Yeah, he wins in England, and Canada wins. And they're saying about this liberal progressive party that they don't care about a balanced budget. They're going to put money into the infrastructure.
Yep.
They're going to spend money, and that's how you make money. So when the American people see this effort in Canada, they're going to understand what Bernie Sanders is talking about. And the other thing is, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets too hot for the Clintons in this nomination race, and they don't try to make a deal with Bernie and say, you could be vice president. And he won't take it, I know that. But I wouldn't be surprised that they would try that.
Oh, no. I mean, anything is possible with the Clinton machine. I mean, it would not surprise me if, it's somebody who's out of politics, or somebody who was once a Republican, now a Democrat. Who knows? And it's they play to win. That's the difficulty of this campaign. But I think one other aspect here, which is important, Rudy, is that again, you look at what happened in Minnesota. Those two, Skip Humphrey and Coleman, led to a Jesse Ventura candidacy and victory. Same thing could happen in a national election if all three are running. Be right back. Rudy, hang with us. It's the Jeff Santos Show.